Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. This time we're going back to our roots a bit with the Sinclair Spectrum. We're going to take a look at 8 games. These are games that I've pulled out of my own collection. Some of them are going to be early classics, and some of them are going to be ones that I fondly remember growing up. So why the Great 8? Well, in the UK there were a few different Spectrum magazines. Your Sinclair, Sinclair User, and Crash magazine, which was the one I bought. Each of these magazines put out their own cover tapes, each with some excellent games on. Trying to outdo each other who could include the most games. Your Sinclair eventually put out the Magnificent 7 cover tapes, and Sinclair User trumped that with the Great 8. So this is what I put on my first Great 8. Okay, first on my list is a game called Bar Rhubarb by Tubazade, released in 1987. This game has possibly the best story of any game ever written. In a lot of games you might have to stop the zombie outbreak to save mankind. You might have to fight off an evil alien race. Here though, things are a little bit more down to earth. In short, you've been caught breaking a window in school and you have to raise the £50 to cover the replacement window. The headmaster for some reason has bet his Ferrari sports car that you cannot raise the £50, and your end of term grade is now based on the amount of money you collect. Brilliant. We are going to try and load all these games as nature intended, the old fashioned way through a tape deck. Some of these tapes are going to be nearing 40 years old, so we might get the odd duff tape. And thanks to the gift of video editing, we can speed things up a bit also. We will still turn to our old friend emulation just to give you the best picture quality possible. Okay, and here's the game. First thing you'll notice is there's no sound. That's because I've muted it. It has possibly the worst soundtrack of any game in existence. But that doesn't take away from the gameplay. This is a really fun game, a little unfair at times. You can see the enemies moving around. The main problem with this game that I find, it's not the enemies that chase you, those are absolutely fine. It's that most of the enemies shoot, and the way they shoot, the angle they shoot, is all completely random. So there are a lot of deaths in this game that feel a bit cheap. But that doesn't take away from the game. I really like this game. Lots of different screens, and it's got that you get a little bit further each time sort of thing, which keeps you coming back. So yeah, really good game, this one. I seem to remember the author who actually made this game was only something like 15 years old at the time. I think he coded this over a school holiday. I think I remember reading that somewhere. So for a 15-year-old kid to create this game, even though it has its faults, I think it's brilliant. Okay, next up we have a trilogy of games. These are all games that are going to be very familiar to very early Sinclair Spectrum adopters. These are the Horus trilogy of games. These games all run on 16K or 48K Spectrums. Okay, you're now looking at a picture of a duck. Why are you looking at a picture of a duck? I just want to give you an idea of what 16 kilobytes is, to perhaps people who are not familiar with technology this old. This picture of a duck is 1414 by 1414 pixels. It's 5.72 megabytes in size, and what we're going to do is we're going to downsize it to 16 kilobytes to see what this game fits in. Okay, so we've now resized our image to 16K, well actually 16.9K. It's reduced in size massively to 76 pixels by 76 pixels. To fit a game in the size of this picture is absolutely phenomenal. I don't know how they've managed to do it back in the day, but they did. Okay, first up is Horus and the Spiders. I do remember this game being a lot easier back in the day. Perhaps 40 odd years has not been kind to my muscle memory. Really hard to jump over these spiders here. But these perhaps were some of the first games I was playing on the Spectrum. Yeah, the game looks basic, but if you compare it to the Radofin TV colour that I showed you in episode 1, we've now got a game with multiple level types, a few different sounds, and a bit more playability here. Okay, moving on to the next game, which is Horus Goes Skiing. This game you have to first cross the road, very much like Frogger. You have to get to the ski shed at the bottom to retrieve your skis, back across the road, and then you can go onto the ski slopes. Every time you get hit you have to pay an ambulance fee, and there is an entrance fee for the downhill section as well, so if you get hit too many times you won't be able to go skiing. Okay, on to Hungry Horus. This is probably the game out of the 3 that I spent the most time on. It's basically a Pac-Man clone, but rather than having ghosts chase you, you are in a park and these are the park guards and you're trying to steal their lunch. Some of the maze designs are actually quite good here, so although it's a short game, it is quite a fun one. Next up is an absolute classic. This is Brian Bloodaxe, probably one of my favourite games on the system. Here you have to steal the crown jewels, sit on the throne to complete the game. I seem to remember there was a quest after this. I think you had to find a golden toilet seat or something like that. But really quirky game, really interesting, varied screens, lots of different enemies, really good. You can also pick up lots of different items, bombs, spades, swords, flails, guns, and I think there's over 100 different rooms in this game I think as well. We'll take a quick look at the map of this game just to give you an idea of the scale and why it took so many hours away. So the game is split into kind of an upper half and a lower half. The top section is for the first quest with the crown jewels, and the bottom section I believe has more interesting items, and I think that's likely where you need to go for the second quest. I have completed it several years ago. This was with save states though. There's no way I could complete this in one single push. Very difficult in places and a little bit unfair, but really varied this game. Awesome. Seeing the full map now, it gives you a good idea of the scale of the game. When I was a kid, I always remember the underground bits seeing really in depth. You know, you may never find the end of it. But here you can see the map in its full scale. And right at the bottom of the game is the hell screen. I always used to try and get here, something of a bit of an achievement. Didn't really do a lot, but it was fun. Our next game is Spiky Harold, where you play it as a hedgehog. Yes, this was pre-Sonic the Hedgehog. This is the Sonic the Hedgehog from 1986, and we have some awesome cover art. You will not see anything like that today. Looks like it's hand painted or something. I think I'd love it on my wall. In this game, basically you need to collect enough food to hibernate and last out the winter. But as always, there's enemies and other hazards to look out for. It was pretty much at this point where we ran into problems. I tried a couple of times, but it just wasn't having it. It's not the tape deck is fine, it's the cassette. The same game is copied on both sides of the cassette, so I did rewind and try on the second side, but it's exactly the same. However, we've still got emulation, so we're fine. I always remember this game being pretty difficult, but coming back to it all these years later, I don't think I remember quite how difficult it is. Everything seems to be absolute pixel perfect jumps, and it's really difficult. Whilst this was one of my favourite games back in the day, to be honest, I'm not sure it makes the list these days. It's just too unforgiving. But as a kid, I remembered I really just liked to explore. Like, you know, you stood no chance of finishing this game, so just to explore, see new screens, that was fun enough for us. Next on the list is a game called Spike, a game I remember fondly playing when I was younger. And yes, it's another platform game. This time the goal of the game is to, I think you have to retrieve a orb or something like that from one of the far distant screens and bring it back to the beginning. It's a bit of a basic game, but good fun this one, and thankfully it still plays well as well. Unfortunately with this one, as with the last game, we are having problems loading it. However, I couldn't work out what it was first of all. I could hear a faint noise on the tape, but I couldn't understand why it wouldn't load until I unplugged the earphone. Yes, it sounds like some kid who owned this before I did, this is a copy I bought off eBay, has used it to record some music on. I've got no idea what band it is, but if you know, put it in the comments, I'm interested. Okay, this is Spike, another platform game. This game is all about switches, enemy patterns and timing. It is quite difficult. It's a game that would be made better if there was some sort of password system on certain screens, or at least extra lives. Most of the time, if you do die, the deaths are your fault, but there are a couple of areas where what you're supposed to do is not particularly obvious. There might be some hidden switches. Some of the things that kill you are not that obvious. It's a bit trial and error. But after a few plays you'll probably be able to sort of master the first sort of 5 screens or so. I remember playing this again now. I got to this screen and I was able to complete it absolutely fine, but at the top of the screen there's a dark blue key and you actually need this to get into a door later on in the game, so I had to start over. This is the start screen for the game. You start in the bottom section. I'm in the top section at the moment and it's the door on the right that I have not got the key for. When I was a kid, this in a way amazed me that you could be on the same screen as the start but in an area you couldn't get to. I know it sounds something really silly now, but I was amazed by that. I thought it was so cool. It seemed like you'd gone so far into the game. We're a little later into the game now and we have picked up the orb. Now with the orb you have to bring it back through each of the screens you've currently been to, and there's also some extra screens after that. It's incredibly difficult. A lot of people have played this game since and don't rate it at all. I still found it quite fun. On to our final game for this episode, which is Rapscallion. Released in 1984, and this is probably my favourite game on the entire system. I've got very fond memories of this game. This is the first game that I can remember buying with my own money. Well, my pocket money. I've got very vague memories of being in a computer shop and buying this. I think it was probably the cover. Really awesome cover art on this one. But I would have only been 4 or 5 years old when I picked this up. I'm happy to report that 37 years later, this cassette tape still loads with no trouble whatsoever. Absolutely brilliant. Take a quick look at the loading screen here, and when you start the game it lets you have a quick look around some of the other screens in the game. It's got a fantastic story, this game. The evil Rapscallion the rogue has taken your castle and treasures and locked you in the dungeon. Thankfully the fairy princess sets you free and gives you the ability to turn into different creatures. I think there's a fly, a bird and I think something else. Each of them has slightly different abilities, whether it's been able to travel through certain surfaces or fit through smaller gaps. You first start out in the wilderness area. You have to get the key from the guard to go into the magic labyrinth. You're then in the labyrinth and finally onto the castle to get your castle back from Rapscallion. I really like the chunky graphics on this game. It really looks like a BBC game or Acon Electron game with it. You have to collect numerous objects throughout the game. There's things like keys, there's extra lives, and there's clues. Each time you start the game, a lot of the objects start in different positions, so every adventure is different. When you do get inside the labyrinth and look around and look at the various screens, you will eventually find these genie guys. You have to collect 3 of these and then you are granted access to the castle. The castle itself is basically one giant maze. I have tried to come back to it, probably 25 years since I last played this game. I used to remember which routes, which tunnels, which shields, books, everything you need to take to get out of here, but that's all been lost to time. Great game though. Don't hang around in the castle too long, as Rapscallion will find you and he will throw you back into the labyrinth. Okay, I hope you enjoyed a look back at 8 games for the Sinclair Spectrum. Hopefully I'll get some more of these done down the line, but other than that, I'll be back soon, maybe with some more games or hardware. Thanks for watching.